They saw her only as the woman in the blue apron running around the emergency room. To many there, Emily Carter was just another overworked nurse, someone who served coffee, took blood pressure, and pushed stretchers through the cold corridors of St. Mary's Medical Center, a busy hospital in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. No one imagined how many stories were hidden behind that calm, firm gaze, nor did they know the true weight of the scars she carried in her soul. That Monday morning, the hospital windows let in a pale winter light. A fine snow was beginning to accumulate outside, and the cold wind cut through the people arriving at reception. Inside the emergency room, however, the atmosphere was different, stuffy, dense, full of voices, monitor alarms, and hurried footsteps. Emily walked briskly, without running, balancing a clipboard and a tablet on her arm, with her stethoscope hanging around her neck. She was 29 years old, with light brown hair tied in, a practical high bun, attentive blue eyes, and a face that always seemed calm, even in the tensest situations. Several discreet tattoos under the sleeve of her lab coat betrayed a story she never fully. Emily spoke little, observed a lot, and moved with the naturalness of someone who had already seen worse things than those that appeared in that room. "Carter!" someone shouted behind her. She turned and saw the senior resident, Dr. Michael Harris, approaching with an impatient expression. He was tall in an impeccably white lab coat with neatly combed blonde hair, a tired but arrogant look. Many admired him for his intelligence, but Emily knew he had a serious problem. He underestimated anyone who didn't have a doctorate, a degree, or a famous surname. "The lady from room 3 is complaining again," he said, rolling his eyes. "She says you didn't treat her properly, that nobody is taking her pain seriously." Emily took a deep breath, suppressing the urge to snap back. On her previous shift, she had already seen the same patient 3 times, a woman who screamed every time someone walked by the door, demanding immediate attention, even though the ward was full of far more serious cases. "I just administered the medication in room 3, doctor," she replied calmly. "Her vital signs are stable. The physical exam didn't show anything serious." "Did you see the chart?" Harris gave a wry smile. "I saw it, Carter, and that's exactly why I ordered some tests to be repeated. You can't rely solely on your clinical feeling. This isn't a military base, it's a real hospital. We need data, not instinct." The words military base hung in the air, as if intentionally thrown in. Some nearby nurses discreetly looked away. Emily felt a slight tightness in her chest, but kept a neutral expression. It was true. Before working there, she had served for years as a combat medic in war zones, but in that room, that details seemed to make little difference. To many, she was just the nurse who came from the army, as if that were merely an exotic detail on her resume. "Yes, doctor," she replied without arguing. "I can monitor the new tests and let you know." "Great. And please try to keep the patient calm. I don't want another complaint ending up in management. We already have enough chaos here." He turned his back and left, calling for another resident. Emily stood still for a second, as if needing to reorganize her thoughts. She was used to his tone. Over time, she had learned not to let it affect her with the same force as before. But sometimes, the memory returned. Soldiers shouting, helicopters landing in dusty areas, blood trickling between gloved fingers, decisions made in seconds. She took a deep breath, glanced at her watch, and started moving again. Her shift was still just beginning. In the medication room, her colleague on duty, Jenna, watched her as she sorted out pills and syringes. "Did he mention the base again?" Jenna asked without raising her voice much. Emily shrugged. "Whenever he runs out of arguments, he does that. It's almost automatic." "He's an idiot," murmured her friend. "If he'd been through half of what you've been through, he wouldn't talk like that." Emily smiled slightly, but didn't answer. There was no point in bringing up the subject. Many colleagues knew she had a military background, but few knew the details. It wasn't something she liked to flaunt. "What's next?" he asked, changing the subject. "To traffic. Accidents are coming in, according to the radio," Jenna replied. "And an 8-year-old boy having an asthma attack in the observation." "Oh, and the owner of room 3, of course. She wants to speak to the boss, not you." Emily nodded, picked up the tablet, and headed to room 3. The patient, a middle-aged woman with impeccably styled hair and an expensive coat draped over her chair, greeted her with a disdainful expression. "Finally," exclaimed the woman, "I've been here for hours." "You have no respect for anyone. This place doesn't even look like an American hospital. It's turning into chaos." Emily maintained a calm demeanor. "Madam, I understand you're feeling uncomfortable," he said in a firm but gentle voice. "I just reviewed your tests, and they're all within normal limits. The pain you're experiencing is real, but there's no sign of anything serious, like a heart attack or anything similar. We'll continue monitoring, and—" "I don't want to hear that from you," the patient interrupted, gesturing with her hand. "I want to talk to the doctor." "To the doctor, not to someone who only knows how to measure blood pressure." The words hit Emily like stones she knew all too well. Someone who only knows how to take blood pressure. It was funny to think that, years ago, she had been the only barrier between death and a soldier with his chest open, holding his life with one hand and the radio with the other. But she didn't respond. Instead, she did exactly what she had learned to do so many times. She swallowed her pride and focused on the bigger mission. "I'll call Dr. Harris to speak with," he replied simply. "In the meantime, if the pain worsens, press this button and someone will come immediately." She left the room and closed the door carefully, without slamming it. The hallway seemed even noisier, with patients on stretchers, anxious family members, and staff rushing around. Emily made a few quick notes on her tablet, updating the chart, and headed to the observation room where the asthmatic boy was waiting. While adjusting the boy's nebulizer, his mother wept softly beside the stretcher. "He always gets worse in the winter," the woman. "I'm afraid I'm going to lose my son." Emily leaned forward slightly. "He's in good hands," she said, looking at the boy affectionately. "His breathing is already better than when he arrived. He's strong. He'll get through this, okay?" Her mother looked at her with gratitude, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fall silent. There, in that quiet encounter, Emily remembered the real reason she had decided to stay in healthcare after her military service. It wasn't the medals, the promotions, or the reports. It was that look of relief from someone who believed there was still hope. Several hours passed, and the emergency room became even more crowded. A man suspected of having a stroke, a teenager having a panic attack, a dehydrated elderly man, a young woman with a broken arm. After slipping on ice, Emily went back and forth, organizing the flow with. She knew who needed priority, who could wait, who needed more emotional attention than medication. At one point, amidst the confusion, the shift supervisor, Ellen, called everyone over to the central nursing station. "Attention, everyone," she said, her expression worked. "We've just received a call from the emergency services. There's been an incident at a military facility a few hours from here. We don't yet know the extent of the damage, but there's a possibility of multiple casualties. Some will likely be transferred here." The murmurs spread. Harris grimaced. "Great, that's exactly what we needed," he said sarcastically. A bunch of soldiers arriving to further overcrowd the emergency room. Emily felt her stomach clench, but she didn't show it. The words military installation triggered memories preferred to keep hidden. Explosions, sirens, dust. The feeling that the whole world could change in a few seconds. "Ellen, do we have more specific information now?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. "Not yet," the supervisor replied, "but the hospital has been alerted to be on standby. Ambulances could start arriving at any moment. I need you to organize the trauma rooms, free up as many beds as possible, and prepare the supplies." Emily nodded. Without a second thought, she began to redistribute patients, prioritize discharges, and review medications. She moved with the same cold confidence she had in her combat days, when every second could determine who would live and who wouldn't. A few minutes later, sirens began to approach. The noise grew louder and louder. The automatic doors of the emergency room opened, and the first group of paramedics entered, pushing a stretcher. "Man, around 30 years old, chest trauma, possible internal bleeding," shouted a parent. "Trauma room 2, Emily replied, making her way through the room. Soon after, more ambulances arrived. The room filled with uniforms, muddy boots, dirty and dazed faces. Some soldiers were conscious, others screamed in pain, some just groaned softly. There was a smell of metal, blood, and something burnt. Emily assumed a natural leadership position. She didn't wait for anyone to tell her what to do. She already knew what needed to be done. "Jenna, come with me to Trauma Room 1. We're going to need large bore 4 access in these 2, she said, pointing quickly. "You there, help move this patient onto the stretcher. Watch your back. Ellen, tell radiology that we'll need urgent CT scans for at least 3 of them." She gave orders in a voice no one was used to hearing. It wasn't the calm voice of a nurse who soothed children and administered medication. It was the voice of someone who had led an entire team under enemy fire, someone who had triaged dozens of wounded in a matter of minutes. Harris watched her from a distance, somewhat surprised. He wasn't used to seeing Emily taking on such a direct leadership role. He himself approached one of the trauma rooms, trying to regain control. "I'll take over here," he said, entering the room where 2 stretchers were being prepared. Emily didn't argue. She knew there were too many tasks to fight over territory. But even as she put on new gloves and prepared another room, her mind operated on a pattern that came from years of experience in similar situations. While the doctors assessed the wounded, she went from case to case, adjusting medications, repositioning equipment, anticipating needs. One of the soldiers began to panic, trying to rip off his oxygen mask. "I don't want to go back there," he shouted. "I don't want to die there." Emily approached, placed a firm hand on his shoulder, and spoke close enough for him to hear her above the chaos. "Soldier, look at me," he said firmly. "You're not there anymore. You're in a hospital. You're safe. The mission now is to breathe slowly and let me take care of you. Understood?" The young man's eyes locked on her. There was something familiar about it, something that reminded him of the voice of a superior who knew what he was talking about. Gradually, his breathing slowed. Emily stayed by his side until the sedative began to take effect. Time seemed to distort. Minutes turned into hours. Hours seemed like minutes. The lights, the sounds, the screams, everything blended together. Emily moved almost on autopilot, but every decision was conscious, precise. In many moments, her memory took her back to the makeshift tents in the desert, to the nights when she had to improvise surgeries with limited resources, sometimes using makeshift flashlights and compressors. She could tell at a glance which injuries could wait and which needed immediate attention. This wasn't written in any hospital protocol, but it was etched into her mind like a survival map. In the midst of this commotion, the landline phone at the central counter began to ring insistently. No one answered at first, they were all busy. The sound of the phone continued to echo until Ellen, sweating, picked up the receiver. "St. Mary's Medical Emergency Room, this is Ellen, nursing supervisor." She listened for a few seconds, and suddenly, her expression changed. It was no longer just tiredness. There was a mixture of surprise and tension in the way she pressed the device against her. Yes, sir, he murmured. "I'll call her immediately." She hung up slowly, her gaze fixed on the void for a few moments. Then she turned to the hallway, where Emily was passing by with a tray of instruments. "Carter," she called, her voice louder than usual. "Emily!" She stopped, placing the tray on a side table. What it was? Ellen took a deep breath before speaking. The call came from the Pentagon. For a second, the silence seemed to spread like an invisible wave. Those nearby slowed their pace, as if they had heard something important, even without fully understanding. Harris, a few meters ahead, immediately turned his face away from the Pentagon? Emily repeated, frowning. "Yes. They specifically asked to speak with you," They asked for you, for your position. They want Captain Emily Carter on the line, now." The last words came out filled with disbelief. Many there didn't even know Emily held that position. Some had heard rumors, but had never seen anything confirmed. To most, she was simply Nurse Carter. There was a brief silence. Emily felt something old awaken within her, as if a door she had kept closed had suddenly been flung open. Captain. It had been a long time since she had heard that title used like that, officially. "Where's the branch line?" he finally asked. Ellen pointed to a small, glass-walled room next to the counter, where there was a more private telephone and a computer connected to internal systems. Emily walked toward the room with firm steps, while her colleagues watched her curiously. Upon entering, he closed the door behind him and picked up the phone, which was already ringing again. "This is Emily Carter speaking," she said automatically in English. "Who's on the line?" The voice on the other end was deep, professional, with a neutral American accent. "Captain Carter, this is Colonel Richard Cole from the Department of Defense," the man said. "We are in direct contact with the command responsible for the facility that sent the wounded to your hospital. We receive information that you are on duty in the emergency room." Emily straightened her posture, as if she were back in the control room. That way of speaking, that formality, it was like putting on an invisible uniform. "Yes, sir, I'm on duty," he replied. "We're receiving several victims." "We know that," the colonel. "The situation there is still developing. There is suspicion of a chemical leak following an explosion, and some victims are still at the scene. We need your field expertise and your background in tactical response, Captain. The hospital where you're located has been designated as a referral center, and command wants you to act as the central point of medical coordination for this incident." Despite the pressure, Emily's voice remained firm. "Understood, sir. What kind of support do you need me to provide?" "We need you to help guide the local medical team via video call, using your experience with conflict zone care and mass casualty incidents," he explained. "The communication system will be redirected to that computer station in the room. We'll be video calling in 2 minutes. Your superiors at the hospital have been notified. You have the authority, within medical guidelines, to lead the tactical care of patients related to this incident." She took a deep breath. Her heart had raced, but not from fear. It was something different. The realization that, once again, she was at a crossroads where her decisions could define the fate of many lives. "Yes, sir. I'll be ready." "Excellent, Captain Carter. It's an honor to see you again under these circumstances, though I would have preferred other," said the colonel, his tone a mixture of respect and urgency. "Your performance in the Kandahar operation is still remembered here. The past came back in a flash. A camp in flames, wounded soldiers everywhere, the night punctuated by the sound of helicopters." She had heard her name echo on the radio, mixed with codes and coordinates. Emily swallowed hard. "Thank you, sir," she replied. "Let's focus on the present. I'll be ready for the video call." "Very well. We'll talk again in a moment." Cole hanging up. The dry click on the other end of the line seemed to close an invisible chapter and open another, right there in the middle of her shift. Emily stood there for a few seconds, holding the disconnected phone, looking at her reflection in the glass of the room. She wasn't in uniform. She had no insignia, no beret, no tactical vest. She wore only the blue hospital apron, a name tag that read Emily Carter, RN, and gloves stained with fresh blood. But inside, something had changed. The title captain seemed to have fit back into her identity, like a piece that had never ceased to be hers, only that it had been kept hidden. As she left the room, she found several eyes fixed on her. Ellen, Harris, Jenna, other nurses, technicians, even some paramedics who had stayed closer to the counter. The murmur in the hallway was almost palpable. "They wanted to speak with you? About your position?" Ellen asked, still stunned. "Captain Carter?" Emily nodded. "The Pentagon is going to open a video line here," he explained, remaining objective. "They need coordination for the care of the victims who are still at the base. The facility suffered an incident with a possible chemical leak, and our hospital is a reference center. They want me to lead the tactical part of this, in contact with the medical team there." Harris's eyes widened, slightly, trying to hide his shock. You have that kind of experience?" he asked, stumbling slightly over his words. "I mean, I knew you had served, but..." "Yes, doctor," Emily replied without irony, simply stating a fact. "I spent 4 years as a combat medic and another 2 in a unit specializing in mass casualty incident response. I worked with chemical spills, massive trauma, and evacuating wounded under fire." There was an uncomfortable silence. Some nurses exchanged glances, as if they were suddenly seeing Emily for the first time. That woman, who changed sheet and cleaned up vomit, also carried tasks that seemed straight out of confidential reports. The computer in the glass-walled room emitted a signal. The video call was coming in. Ellen looked at Emily. "Go," said the supervisor. "We'll hold on to what we can here. If they're calling you for this reason, it's because they trust you." Emily nodded and returned to the room. She sat down at the computer, adjusted her microphone, and accepted the call. The screen showed a command room with maps on the wall, people walking hurriedly, and in the center, Colonel Cole, now visible in full body, wearing an impeccable uniform. Next to him was a military doctor in a lab coat with a name tag and a radio hanging from his neck. "Captain Carter, are you listening to me?" the colonel asked. "Perfectly, sir," she replied. "Very well. This is Dr. James Rourke, chief physician of the affected facility. He is at the outpost, very close to the area of the incident." Rourke inclined his head in greeting. "Captain, it's an honor," he said. "I've heard of you. We need all the help you can give us." Emily felt a slight blush, but she didn't let it show in her posture. "Let's get down to business, Dr. Rourke," he said. "What exactly is the situation right now?" He began to describe the situation rapidly: an explosion in a materials depot, possible release of a toxic substance, multiple military personnel exposed, some still trapped in the danger zone. The local team was attending to the situation in makeshift tents, but there was little specific experience with large-scale chemical incidents. As she listened, Emily was already taking quick notes and mentally outlining a triage and support protocol. She asked for reported symptoms, exposure time, available equipment, evacuation routes, ambulance capacity, and access to antidotes. Outside, some colleagues approached the glass door, trying to overhear fragments of the conversation. They couldn't hear everything, but they saw Emily's concentrated expression, her firm gestures, her eyes that shifted rapidly, following information coming through on the screen. She began to speak confidently, without hesitation. "Dr. Rourke, first thing, establish a clear decontamination zone away from the prevailing wind. No patient suspected of exposure enters the clean area without undergoing complete decontamination. Use plenty of water. Remove contaminated clothing, protect the airways. Do not allow anyone to move between zones without changing protective equipment. Prioritize severe respiratory symptoms, patients with altered consciousness, and signs of shock." As he spoke, he mentally drew a map of the base as if he were there. Dr. Rourke took notes, nodding his head in response. "We'll need to synchronize what you do there with what we'll do here at the hospital," Emily continued. "I'll coordinate with the emergency room team to prepare specific post-decontamination care protocols. Some of your patients will be coming here. We need to ensure they don't bring the contaminating agent with them." She pressed the mute button for a moment and called Ellen through the glass, gesturing for her to come into the room. "Ellen, we need to organize a specific reception area for patients from this incident," she said, switching back to Portuguese. "Anyone coming from the base should be considered potentially exposed, even after decontamination there. We'll separate a corridor, prepare extra people, coordinate with the specialized cleaning staff, and notify the IQ. And we need to coordinate with triage so that no one puts these patients in the same closed room with ordinary people." Ellen nodded, frantically taking notes. "I'll take care of that right now," he said. "What else?" "Ask the lab to prepare for a high demand for liver and kidney function tests, blood gas analysis, and anything else that might indicate systemic toxicity. And we need to warn management about the possibility of the press and regulatory bodies showing up. The priority is clinical, but they will want answers." Ellen practically ran out of the room, now not just as a supervisor, but as someone who understood that there was a new technical leadership in that specific context. Outside, Harris watched everything, still trying to process it. The woman he had reprimanded that morning for relying on clinical feeling was now literally running a military outpost and reorganizing the hospital's care protocol in real time under direct guidance from the Pentagon. He approached the glass trying to listen, but the door was closed. He could only see Emily speaking intently to the screen while the colonel and Dr. Rourke listened with almost reverent attention. The following hours were an intense combination of remote coordination and field work. Emily alternated between the video call room and the emergency room environment, adapting protocols, reassessing patients, and reorganizing care flows. When new soldiers began to arrive this time after proper decontamination, she had already prepared the team to receive them. She explained, calmly and firmly, what symptoms each person should look for, which warning signs required immediate intervention, and which tests to prioritize. In one case, a soldier arrived seemingly fine, walking on his own, saying he was just a little dizzy. His vital signs were almost normal. Someone might have missed it, but Emily observed him more closely. The slight tremor in his hands. The way he took a second longer to answer simple questions. "We're going to put him under closer observation," he advised. "Order neurological function tests, blood gas analysis, and keep him closely monitored. This could be a late-onset consequence of exposure." Hours later, the young man's condition began to change subtly but clearly. Thanks to early monitoring, it was possible to intervene and prevent the situation from becoming critical. Harris, who was following the case, was impressed. "Did you notice that just by looking at him?" she asked in a calmer moment while they were updating the medical. "It's not just about looking," Emily replied humbly. "It's a combination of things: subtle symptoms, history of exposure, comparison with other similar cases I've seen. Experience helps connect the dots." Harris cleared his throat, as if something was stuck in it. He, clearly, wanted to say something, but he was unaccustomed to admitting that he had underestimated someone. I think I misjudged you," he murmured finally. "When I spoke of your clinical feeling, I had no idea you had dealt with this type of situation at this level." Emily gave a small smile, without resentment. "Everything's fine, doctor. Sometimes, what we see from the outside doesn't tell the whole story." He nodded, somewhat embarrassed. "Still, you handled all of this today. The Pentagon calling the emergency room directly and asking for you to be at the station, that's not exactly common. It's also unusual for me to be in the middle of a civilian emergency trying to be just another member of the team," replied. "But I think that sometimes the past ends up knocking on the door again." By late afternoon, the situation began to stabilize. The base had managed to control the incident, and the last victims were being assessed. Colonel Cole returned to the scene to give an overview. "Captain Carter, on behalf of the Department of Defense, I want to officially thank you for your performance today," he said, facing the camera, while some team members in the command room in the background seemed about to applaud. "The coordination you provided significantly reduced the number of complications, both at the base and at referral hospitals. The board has already been informed." "I only did what needed to be done, sir," Emily replied sincerely. "There was a whole team involved here and there. Even so, leadership makes a difference," the colonel continued. "This will not be forgotten. The command is evaluating ways to formally recognize your contribution. Until then, know that your name has started circulating around here again, and that's no small thing." He smiled slightly. "And if you ever decide to return to full-time active duty, the doors will be open. But from what I see, the place where you are today is also a front line." Emily felt a mixture of melancholy and peace. Part of her missed that life, the intense camaraderie, the clear sense of mission. Another part knew that there, caring for children with asthma, dehydrated elderly people, and anxious individuals, she was also saving lives, only in a different way, less dramatic, more silent. "Thank you, sir," she replied, "and thank you for trusting me today." "The trust was more than justified," he said seriously. "Have a good night, Captain." Cole hanging up. The screen went dark. Emily stared at her reflection for a few seconds. Exhaustion began to weigh on her body. Her shoulders ached, her legs felt like lead, her head throbbed slightly. Yet, there was a strange feeling of fullness, as if, for the first time in a long time, all the pieces of her story had fallen into place. When she left the room, she was greeted by something she hadn't expected. A brief, spontaneous round of applause from some nearby team members. It wasn't anything grand. There were no cameras, no speeches, just applause and respectful glances. Jenna approached and hugged her quickly. "I always knew you were amazing," said the friend, emotionally. "But today, the world decided to confirm it." Ellen placed her hand on Emily's shoulder. "The administration already knows everything," he commented. "I don't think the hospital has ever received a call from the Pentagon asking for someone for the military post. They are ... impressed." Harris, standing a little further back, seemed to hesitate, but finally took a few steps forward. "Carter," he began, scratching the back of his neck, "I wanted to say that, well, that you did great today, and that I'm sorry for underestimating. I won't look at your name tag the same way anymore." Emily smiled, tired but genuine. "Thank you, doctor. We're a team. Everyone did their part." He nodded, this time without any irony. "If I ever find myself in a situation like the ones you've faced, I sincerely hope you'll be there for me." The emergency room was bustling with activity. New patients arrived. Others were discharged. Some slept in the observation ward. The world outside kept turning. The incident at the military base would be discussed on television, perhaps analyzed in reports and high-level meetings. But inside the hospital, much of it would remain stored only in the memories of those who saw Emily transform before their very eyes, from just another nurse into someone whose story was too big to fit on a name tag. Later, near the end of her shift, Emily sat beside the bed of one of the young soldiers who had been brought in. He had bandages on his arm, some scratches on his face, and was staring fixedly at the ceiling, as if he could still hear the echo of the explosion. "Were you there from the beginning?" he asked quietly, when he realized someone was there. "Not exactly," Emily replied, "but I've been to similar places." He turned his head to face her. "They talked about you at the base," she murmured. "They said there was a captain at the hospital helping us here. That's you, isn't it?" She could have said no, deflected, changed the subject. But at that moment, she decided she didn't need to run away from who she really was anymore. "Yes," she replied simply. "I am the captain they spoke of. But here, first and foremost, I am someone who cares for you as a patient. The title doesn't change that." His eyes shone with gratitude. "Thank you for not giving up on us," he said with effort. "Sometimes it seems like nobody sees what's happening there." Emily felt a lump in her throat. How many times had she herself felt invisible, even while carrying the weight of stories no one knew? "I see," she replied firmly. "Even if the rest of the world doesn't know everything, I see. And that's enough for me." The young man closed his eyes, breathing a little more easily. She stood there for a few minutes, in silence, just listening to the monitor showing a steady rhythm. In the hallway, voices mingled with the typical sounds of a busy American hospital. Nurses, doctors, patients, family members, security guards, each with their own story, with pains and victories that weren't always visible. When her shift finally ended, the sky outside was already dark. The snow had stopped, but the cold remained intense. Emily grabbed her coat from the locker room, put her name tag in her pocket, and for a moment, stared at her reflection in the mirror. She saw the woman in the blue apron that everyone saw. But she also saw, behind that, the captain who had learned to make decisions amidst chaos. The professional who had been underestimated. The person who carried invisible scars and yet still got up every day to put on a pair of scrubs and return to the front line, be it a battlefield or a crowded emergency. She remembered the words the patient in room 3 had said that morning. Someone who only knows how to measure blood pressure. She thought of the colonel calling her to her post. She thought of the team clapping, the soldiers breathing better, the asthmatic boy sleeping peacefully after the nebulizer. All of this was part of the same story. As she walked out the hospital's main door, the cold wind hit her face. She inhaled the icy air deeply, as if wanting to preserve that day in her memory. Not because of the recognition, the call from the Pentagon, the formal praise, but because, amidst all of that, she had rediscovered a simple truth. Someone's true worth isn't measured by what others can see from afar, but by what that person chooses to do when no one is paying attention. Many would still look down on the woman in the blue apron who circulated among the stretchers, unaware that, in another context, she had already been called Captain Carter on military radios and in command room. Others, however, would never see her in the same way again. And for Emily, that was enough. She knew who she was, with or without her uniform, with or without medals, with or without applause. She knew that, both in the silent corridors of a hospital and on the invisible front lines of the world, he would continue doing exactly what he always did: stand by those who need it most, even when everyone else still doesn't understand who is actually holding everything together.